This is the part of the program I was most excited about. It has a lot to do with my own life experience and the way in which this subject speaks to almost everyone one coaches or all the people in one's life. When a coach of mine described this whole aspect, the triangle that's known as the victim-persecutor-rescuer. It's designed by a fellow that Ed has worked with, and Ed's going to come up and give us a presentation. He was one of the very early people to research this phenomenon with Dr. Steve Karpman. It's called the Karpman Triangle. And when he originated it, he's a founding partner of the Gender Leadership Group. He's the chair-elect of the Mankind Project USA, and he's been in the field of organizational transformation for over 40 years. Here it is. This is a session on the Karpman Triangle and the way in which all of our lives revolve around this victim, persecutor, perpetrator. So, Ed Gurowitz. Ed, we've never done this before, but here we go, double cheek.
Am I on? Yeah, good. As soon as I walk on stage, my phone rings. I thought I had it turned off. I didn't want to talk to this person. Anyhow, in 1965, a psychiatrist here in San Francisco named Ed Gurowitz published a book that is, in retrospect, 50 plus years later, had an amazing impact considering it was just a very small book by somebody very few people had ever heard of. It was called Games People Play. And in it, Ed Gurowitz described a dynamic in human interactions that basically prevented people from being authentic, prevented people from being intimate. And he called it games. Well, there was another psychiatrist working with Ed Gurowitz. In fact, there were 4 people who were I'll come back to that, who were the founders of this. After Byrne, there were 3, one of whom was Steve Karpman. And you see that picture next to him, that's Ed Gurowitz. My son's named after him. And Steve was a student of drama and theater. And he looked at Byrne's theory of games, and he said, you know, there's something really interesting here. Because if you analyze almost any drama, it's easiest to see with Shakespeare. It comes down to 3 roles. The persecutor, sometimes called the villain. The rescuer, sometimes called the hero. And the victim. And where the drama comes, and Byrne had said this in his theory of games as well, is when those roles switch. So, Othello is the victim, Desdemona is the persecutor, Iago is the rescuer, Othello's best friend, and then it all changes. And that's where the drama comes from. Well, shortly after, so Steve published this in 1978. Shortly after that, I began to look at what are the energy changes that go with the roles? Because roles are just roles. They're static, but there have to be energy changes. And I think about 1980, I published an article on this and have been looking at it ever since. And the thing that I realized is that what holds the drama triangle together is blame. As long as the victim can blame someone. Now, sometimes it's other people. Sometimes it's the circumstances. You've heard the expression, victim of circumstances. Sometimes it's even myself. There's something wrong with me. I'm fundamentally flawed. And that's why I'm a victim. So the victim says, it's not my fault. It's his or her fault. or it's the fault of the circumstances. The persecutor says, it's your fault. There's something wrong with you. And the rescuer says, oh, it's not your fault. It's his or her fault, or it's the circumstances. Don't feel bad. And off we go. Now, if you look at the energetics of this, it's pretty interesting because the victim has all the power. That's why Steve drew this triangle with the victim on the downhill point, because all energy flows to the victim. Think of someone in your life who's a victim, who plays the victim card. And think of the energy suck that's there if you try to rescue them. Burns said the classic rescue game is called Why Don't You, Yes But. Why don't you try this? Yeah, but that'll never work. Why don't you try that? Yeah, but I tried that once and it didn't work. And pretty soon the rescuer is exhausted. And the victim, that comes the drama now. The victim says, see, you can't help me. And the victim becomes a persecutor. There's an old Danny Kaye routine about baseball called Miller to Miller to Haller, that kind of goes, just dances like that around and around and around. Why is this relevant to what we're talking about here? Well, first of all, it's relevant to everything in life. As Jan said, this is a fundamental, compelling dynamic of being human. We don't have time, and I won't bore you with it, but if you look at the neuropsychology of this, we are hardwired as human beings to be victims because we're hardwired to scan our environment for threat, for something that's going to happen to us. If you look at it in terms of inclusion, can I go backwards on this thing? Yeah, I can. Look at that. Inclusionary leadership requires a relationship that allows for inclusion and that allows for an appreciation of differences. This does not allow for inclusion or an appreciation of differences, because here differences are simply proof that there's something wrong. Now, if you put 3 people in a room, you're going to see this happen within half an hour. It's that compelling. So I began to think about, some years ago, what's the alternative? What do we do about this? Because no matter what you think this is like one of those woven finger puzzles. The harder you pull to get out of it, the tighter it gets. And it has that quality to it of being stuck in it. I've got to be I'm either a victim, or I'm going to be a persecutor and blame the victim, or I'm going to be a rescuer and try and help them, and no matter what happens, I end up a victim. And I realized that it requires a whole different construct. You can't get there from here. You know that old story? I used to live in New England. Guy drives up to a village in Maine. Fellow sitting out on the porch, and he says, how do you get from here to Brunswick? The old guy says, well, you go down. No, that won't work. Well, you go down that road. No, that won't work. Finally says, you know what? You can't get there from here. Well, you can't get there from here. So I began to look at, what's the problem? Well, it's hierarchical and it's exclusive. Forgetting, I got this thing here. The victim is less capable and needs help. The persecutor is more capable and is in the right. And the rescuer is more capable and occupies the higher moral ground. So what's the alternative? Well, I'm going to suggest to you that there is an alternative, and that it goes like this. It starts with ownership.